You make several points that are definitely worth addressing. First, uncanny ties to theism. I agree, there are some very real similarities between statist arguments and theist arguments. Mostly, we're arguing about very similar things. Both the state and God are incorporeal, non-physical entities of great power. So, in our attempts to describe and support these entities, our arguments are going to be notably similar because what we are describing is notably similar. Anti-statists also have very uncanny ties to theism, but they are the problematic aspects. What anti-statists are describing has no basis in reality. There is not proof and evidence. There is not scientific backing for their arguments. It's purely theoretical, purely imaginary, purely hopeful. They keep moving the target, and other such unreasonable debate tactics. These are the similarities that anti-statists share with theists. These are the problems of theism, and that's the aspects that anti-statists share. You also say taxation is theft, and that this theft is the basis of statism. I agree, taxation is theft, and this theft is the basis of statism. However, this is the minimal amount of theft. Without the state, more theft would occur. Less theft is preferable to more theft. Without the state, without police, without authorized use of force, you will have unauthorized use of force. You will have thieves taking whatever they want. With the state, you have a much reduced theft rate. Let's look at this. In a stateless society, someone decides to start being a thief. Since there's no one to stop him or even slow him down, he steals from 80% of the population, taking 50% of their wealth. This is a lot of theft. Now let's look at how statism works. You have an election to vote in taxes. These taxes are 20%, not 50%. 40% of the population votes for it, 40% abstains because they really don't care one way or another, and 20% votes against it. So you've got 20% of the population that didn't want the taxes, but they're being taken anyways, and these taxes are only 20% of their income. So you have theft from 20% of the population of 20% of their wealth, as opposed to theft from 60% of the population of 50% of their wealth. This is a dramatic reduction in theft. This is my support for statism, is it reduces the force and violence and coercion in the system. Not that it isn't force and violence in and of itself. Then you really do a bad job of mischaracterizing the statist argument. And did some of this in the last bit in how to build roads. This is not a real argument that statists have against anti-statism. This is one of those arguments that the anti-statists put forward and gets shot down by the statists. The real argument that I have against anti-statism is how to prevent future states. What's to stop Canada from invading? What's to stop the mafia from taking over? What's to stop the theists from enforcing their religion with guns? What's to stop the drug cartels from taking over? These are all forms of state that are much worse than the government. And I prefer the government to these forms of state. Once these forms of state cease to exist, I will support abolishing the government. But that's not there. We're not there yet. Then your definition of state is horribly non-functional. First, you talk about the monopoly on the use of force. This is simply not true. There are many forms of state. There are many different states. England, France, America, these are all state governments. We've all shot at each other on various occasions over the years. There's not a monopoly on the use of force because each of these separate states has the use of force and uses it against other states. Even within a nation and a government state, there are other states. You've got drug cartels, you've got gangs, you've got religions, you've got corporations. These are all forms of state that use violence and coercion within the state of the government. So a monopoly on the use of force is just non-existent. And then you talk about how the use of force is a one-way street. This as well just simply isn't true. Like on the monopoly of force aspect, there's a bunch of different states that are at war with each other, and so there's a two-way street between the various states on violence. Also, the people under a state use violence against the state on a regular basis. Any criminal is using violence against the state. Anyone that fights back against the cops is using violence against the state. Any type of revolution is violence against the state. It is not a one-way street. It does go both ways. You don't see much violence against the state because the majority of the population agree that the state and its use of force results in the minimum use of force in the system. And so we're back to my definition of state, which is the authorized use of force. This is a consistent and reasonable definition that makes sense. Then you talk about voluntary free markets. That this would be the basis of a stateless society. And I agree. But there's some major problems with actually implementing truly voluntary anything. The problem is expressed as externalities. If a factory produces pollution, the people affected by that pollution do not have a direct say in that factory. This is not a voluntary exchange. It is not free market. Using your definition, there is a monopoly, or there is an attempt on a monopoly of the use of force because the pollution only goes one way. It is definitely perceived as a one-way street. To use my definition, the factory workers are authorized by their boss to produce this pollution. So, a factory producing pollution fits the definition of a state. Either of our definitions. So, that is not a voluntary exchange. Yes, the goods produced by the factory after the fact of pollution could be exchanged voluntarily, But that does not include all affected parties, because the poisoning of my drinking water is an effect of that production, and I wasn't included in the sale. So, until all pollution is gone, you don't have voluntary free markets. Until all other externalities are gone, you do not have voluntary free markets. There are good examples of existing voluntary free markets. They don't exist in reality. They exist in the virtual world, places like the World of Warcraft. There is no viable threat of violence player to player in World of Warcraft. There is no government that enforces laws. There are natural laws that just simply can't be broken in World of Warcraft. Stuff like you can't attack other players, you can't steal from other players. This creates the environment necessary for the voluntary free market. Since there is no pollution, there is no crime, there is no theft, the exchange of goods is a voluntary exchange between two individuals, the free market, and it works well. But until reality is more in line with this aspect, you have statism. There are entities which use force, and it is this basic human aspect that needs to change for voluntary free markets, anti-statism to work. It's not the government or religion or any other entity which can be pointed at. It is us. We have to change. And this isn't going to happen in our lifetime. Maybe in many, many generations down the road, but not today.